The CIS critical security controls provide a prioritized path to improve an enterprise's cybersecurity posture. Version 8 includes some exciting updates to keep up with the ever-changing cyber ecosystem. The CIS controls are now task-focused and combined by activities rather than by who manages the devices, decreasing the number of CIS controls from 20 to 18. The 18 controls contain 153 safeguards, which you formerly knew as subcontrols. Safeguards are still prioritized into implementation groups, or IGs, with IG1 defining essential cyber hygiene. The updated CIS controls point to existing standards and recommendations, along with V8, supporting information, products, and services are updated and available to help you with implementation. Learn more about CIS Controls version 8 by visiting CISECURITY.org/controls.
Listening to the Barcode Podcast with your host, Chris Glandon, serving cybersecurity straight up with no chaser. Let's hit the bar and grab a drink.
Hey, Danny boy, what's up, man?
Not much, Chris.
Hey, man, when did you start serving holographic drinks?
It's the future, man. Here at Barcode, we push the limits. It's all about innovation.
Well, until the FDA approves that innovation, I need something next gen, yet a little less risky.
I got you. This one's called the Flux Incapacitator. It's got 1 ounce white rum, half an ounce of grenadine, 4 ounces of pineapple juice. Fill a shaker with ice, add the rum and pineapple juice, and shake it vigorously. Strain into a cocktail or double rock glass. Gently pour into the grenadine, and that's it. Walk away with 1.21 gigawatts of power in your hand.
1.21 gigawatts!
Huh. Well, that guy seems to like it. Let me check it out, man. Damn, that's actually pretty good. Well, listen, man. A true futurist just pulled up. So I'll see you again in the near future.
All right, Chris. Be safe and time travel. I'll see you next round.
Pablos Holman is a hacker, inventor, and entrepreneur who leverages superpowers we get from technology to reimagine everything humans do. He helped start Blue Origin for Jeff Bezos, as well as Intellectual Ventures Lab for Nathan Myhrvold. Currently, Pablos is a venture capitalist at Deep Future, backing mad scientists, rogue inventors, crazy hackers, and maverick entrepreneurs who are implementing science fiction, solving big problems, and helping our species become better ancestors. Pablos, thanks for stopping by Barcode, man.
Yeah, awesome.
So, Pablos, so many angles that I want to attack this conversation from. But for my listeners, I think it's important to first help them understand who you are personally and where your story begins, right? So let's start at the core, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You grew up in Alaska.
Yeah, I grew up in Alaska.
Got into computers at a young age.
Yeah, I got my first Apple II when I was about 9. So it was one of the first Apple IIs. Like I probably one of the first couple thousand Apple IIs ever made.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I can't say I know too many people that had an Apple II.
Oh, I know a lot. But yeah. Yeah, in those days, so that was kind of like the first home computer, the first computer that you could have at home. And so, I kind of, like most of your listeners probably all grew up with computers, but I'm like the first one to grow up with a computer, I guess.
Yeah. So what were you into with the Apple II? Were you programming at that time, or were you more into gaming then?
So Apple II, so those days, like nobody had seen a computer at all.
Right.
And so it was, I had seen a computer because my dad had put some of the first computers in the oil industry. And at the time that was, the biggest industry in the world and the most wealthy. And so, so that was they bought computers early, but they had these, mainframes and like crazy, huge machines. And, he just thought it was cool. So he got computers set up was at Arco at the time. And so I kind of got to go to his office and just see this stuff. And I don't think he really understood them, and I didn't really understand them, but it was exciting. And so when the Apple II came out, Apple was looking for customers, and the oil industry just bought everything, in those days. And so kind of like the tech industry now. And so he decided to get me a computer, or just get one for the house. I don't know. He just thought it was cool. And so we got that thing, and I immediately just, dove in. I spent my entire childhood on that thing. And it was such a weird time because, there was like nobody who knew more about it than me, even though I was like 9 or 10 years old. And then there was no internet. So like just getting software was like, it was an adventure, because you had to like find out who else had a computer, and then like go over to their place and get, and like swap floppies, right? Which is not a euphemism. Like we had, I remember like, I'm like a kid, and my parents would like drop me off at some shady trailer park across town to hang out with some skeezy old dude and like copy his floppy disks onto mine. I couldn't even like, discs were, I remember like, these are like 5 1/4 inch floppy disks. And they're like, I remember at first they were like $5 each or something, so I didn't have a lot of them. You couldn't afford to just like waste floppy disks on stuff. And that disk had to hold the entire OS and the app and all your data. So it was just, everything was so limited. But anyway, yeah, it was pretty rough, slow going in those days. There were some games, but games were exciting, but they were, you had to like go trade your games for somebody else's games, and you had to like, it was just hard to get stuff. And it's Alaska. Like if you tried to order something in the mail, you had to literally like mail a check to some other state and wait like 6 weeks for someone to mail you a floppy disk back in the mail. So it was just dark ages, But anyway, that's why I learned so much. I think is I had a lot of time to crash my Apple II and reboot it.
Yeah, by the time you get the game, the Apple III's out already.
Apple III was a dud. Apple III was totally useless. Nobody wanted that thing. It was like a bizarre. It was like Apple's attempt to like make an Apple II compelling to business, and it just completely didn't work.
I didn't get my first Apple till about a year ago.
Okay. All right. Cool.
I've been straight Windows all this time.
Okay. Sure.
My first computer was a Tandy 5000.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that was back. Yeah, that was back in the day, but no Apple, man. I don't think we could afford it.
Yeah. Well, it was, I don't know. It's hard to afford anything.
Yeah. So cool, man. So you got that, you were already interested in it. When did you realize that technology was the career path that you wanted to go down? Can you remember what hooked you or what made you gravitate specifically to technology?
I don't think there was like ever any chance of doing anything else. Like I was hooked on this Apple II. I thought it was amazing. I tried to convince everyone else of that from childhood, and people had never seen a computer, but they were pretty sure it wasn't cool. And I was really trying to convince people that, no, this is going to be powerful and useful, and someday it'll, have enough memory to actually do something. And no one believed me. I remember like everybody would come over. I was in a small town in Alaska, so people would hear that I had a computer and they would like come over to like see the computer. It'd be like if you had a giraffe living in your backyard, like people would come by to see the giraffe. It was kind of like that. And so, people would come over and I'd take them down to the basement and show them the computer, and I'd try to show them what it could do, and just completely, just to say they had no conception of what I was talking about. But I think that it made me motivated to try and figure out how to convey to people why it was important and why it could be helpful to them. And I was really motivated to do that. And that kind of set me on a different course than a lot of other people who got into computers early, because, by the time I got out of high school or something, computers had somewhat legitimized themselves in business, and I wanted to go use them. I wanted to put computers to use to do things for people. And so I could get hired by anybody to go put computers in a company. And that was exciting to me. And whereas going and learning about, I don't know, like computer science, I'm not even sure that was a term yet, the science of computation, like how chips work, and electrical engineering. That's kind of what universities were doing at the time.
Yeah.
And some of that I already knew, like the software side of things I already knew. I understood at a very low level, like what all the ones and zeros were doing. But I didn't necessarily know all the electronics aspect of things was still kind of mysterious to me. But that wasn't the important part. The important part to me was like, take a computer, stick it in front of somebody and show them how it could make their life better. That was very exciting to me. And so building applications and that kind of stuff for users, and even just showing them how to use a computer, that was all exciting to me for a long time. And so I guess from the point is, I felt like I had this superpower from an early age of like, I could make things better than anyone imagined, and using a computer. And so I kind of got hooked on computers first as a technology. And then over time, computers they were so generally useful that you could use them to advance other technologies, right? And so I ended up getting drawn into a lot of other things that it wasn't about advancing computers as much as using computers to advance other things. And what I got interested in was advancing technologies. So by maybe by the late 90s or something, I wasn't trying to just use computers in other businesses. I was trying to use computers to advance other technologies, and then it kind of extended from there. And so now I'm just more fixated on advancing technologies all across the board, even though computers is kind of where I started.
Yeah. So I think over time that evolved into what you would call the cypherpunk era, right?
Yeah.
And that was more around in the early to mid 90s?
I'd say mid to late 90s for me. There was certainly some of the origin story of cypherpunks goes back further than that, but I ended up in the Bay Area in the 90s working on, I had a company we were trying to do cryptocurrency in the 90s.
Wow.
And that, and so we had the kind of Bay Area cypherpunks there were working on these technologies, trying to use crypto systems, cryptographic protocols to change the way we do things online. And my part of it was more about currency and transaction processing, but there were a lot of other things cypherpunks were focused on at the same time.
And cypherpunk started in the Bay Area, right? Is that how you got involved with it?
I would say it started on Usenet.
Okay, got it.
That might be, or that.
So it was a forum essentially, right? Or
Yeah, cypherpunks goes way back. I mean, I think depending on what you count, maybe the late 80s even. So there's a few guys who are sort of the originators of the cypherpunks, and that were kind of philosophically the basis for it. So that's like Eric Hughes and Tim May in particular. And but they really kind of got the whole thing started as a community of people who are, looking out into the future of the internet, seeing that, as the internet grows, a lot of the usual societal problems would kick in and have an effect on the network. And in particular, people would try to control the internet, or people or organizations or governments or whatever.
Seems accurate to me.
Yeah. And in the view of this particular group of fringe wackos on the internet, they saw the history of people and governments as being fairly poorly behaved when they get control. And so the cypherpunks really, I'd say the fundamental insight there was that, we could use the cryptographic toolkit to create protocols that would ensure that the internet stayed free. And that these protocols could use cryptography to level the playing field. We could use cryptography to create, internet protocols that didn't allow anyone to get control of the network. No one could control what we do. We can't control what you do. And we see that as being kind of a modern human right. And so, obviously that's a bit radical. Even now, a lot of people are looking to governments to exert more control over the internet and things like that. And so, cypherpunks was never a very mainstream thing. And I think, it's important to understand, like, there's no application process or membership card. Like, anybody can just join that email list, or in those days, anybody could join and dive in. So, if you think discourse on Twitter is actively hostile, well, go read the cypherpunks archives, because,
Did they exist?
Oh, the archives are there. And this is very important. I mean, it's all public. The whole list was public. And it was unique because it also allowed for anonymous posters, right? Because anonymity was considered one of the fundamental things you needed to be free online. And so the cypherpunks list allowed anyone to post. There's a lot of spam and shit to filter through, but it made for very rigorous intellectual discourse.
Yeah.
Right? Because anyone could say anything freely. And the only things that were respected were the things that were technically accurate. And you had a lot of very extreme politics in the thinking behind these things, right? By extreme, I mean, extreme dedication to freedom, and lots of different interpretations about what that means and how far it should be taken and all that. But I think, I haven't tried to go back and read the cypherpunks archives because I lived through that, but as a historical record, I think they're very important because there's very little going on today even in the extensive crypto and DeFi and Web3 and all that stuff that wasn't presaged by the cypherpunks. And so we had anticipated the need for this stuff. I think what's exciting now is to kind of see that things have played out the way we'd hoped, technically better than we could have hoped technically. The crypto toolkit is pretty highly developed now. Thanks to the hype cycle of cryptocurrency, we've attracted a whole generation of coders to that. In those days, there were, I don't know, maybe 100 people on Earth who I think could code and also understand cryptography in a meaningful way. It was a very small community, and 99 of them were cypherpunks. So, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I'd love to go back and look at those archives and correlate what was stated then to modern day technology. So I'm sure
oh yeah, it would be a fascinating, somebody needs to write a book to doing that. I mean, it's, you want to read Eric Hughes and Tim May. You want to read Bob Hettinga. There's great posts in there by a whole bunch of different folks who are thinking about this stuff and trying to figure out how do we how do we, and then also, a bunch of really technical posts about, advancements in cryptography and what they could enable, because each little advancement gave us a bit more optimism about being able to construct these protocols.
Yeah, and you're talking about, the deep web, cryptocurrency, and just seeing how that evolved, and who knows, there may be something in there that stretches beyond where we are now.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think people don't. Cypherpunks may sound like a super niche thing, but we had a big effect overall. In the 90s, the first thing we had to do is get cryptography decriminalized, right? Because at the time, encryption was classified as a munition by the U.S. government. Using a cryptographic algorithm had the same export controls as a nuclear missile. Like you couldn't legally export software that used strong cryptography around the world. So we had to fight Congress on. At the time, the Congress had this stupid idea called the Clipper chip, which was going to be this chip that gave them a backdoor into all cryptography. That was idiotic, and we had to fight Congress, and we won. And not just cypherpunks, but EFF and other groups online really fought Congress and managed to win that over. That was important early win for what we were advocating for. And then, what people don't realize is cypherpunks have, at the time, our first, I think the first successful project we built was what were called the anonymous remailers. And this was a cryptographic protocol that allowed people to send email anonymously. And
when was this? Like, what time frame are we looking at?
This was live in the 90s.
Okay.
We had the first, So the first ones were running in the mid 90s, late 90s. There were, successive generations of those protocols.
So nothing existed like that at that time.
At the time, all email was unencrypted and wide open.
Right.
Right. Very easy to spoof, but also not anonymous in the sense that, like, if you wanted to figure out where an email came from, you could read the headers and go back and figure out exactly what server it came from. So, and I remember, like, in the early, probably around 96 or 7, I remember, like 96, I think, I used an anonymous remailer to email the police and report a crime. And it was because I had pieced together someone I knew was stealing computers.
Interesting.
And I was able to figure out that was happening, but I didn't want someone I knew to figure out that I was the guy who turned them in, because, it was uncool. Not just, I didn't know these people that well, but, so I used anonymous remailer to email the police about that. But it's just a simple example of that's the kind of thing that those things made possible. Right. And, but they also got used for sending death threats to people and stuff like that, which was uncool. So, occasionally cypherpunks who were running remailers would get a knock on the door from the FBI or the Secret Service, and we'd have to explain how the whole thing worked. But yeah, anyway, the point is, so remailers were one of the early things that cypherpunks developed. We also had other projects with varying degrees of success. One of them was an extension for AOL Instant Messenger called Off the Record, which was a way of adding encryption to Instant Messenger so that no one could prove, who sent the message, right? Which is important because, and it was encrypted both ways, because, what a lot of people don't realize about things like public key cryptography, which is, what's in SMIME and SSL and all that stuff, is you're cryptographically signing every single thing that you do, right?
Right.
And so there's kind of a paper trail there that's cryptographically enforced, and that's not what you always want for every situation. So anyway, so cypherpunks went on to build the remailers. Some of them started the Tor project in another context, but same community of people made that possible. Tor is the onion router, so that's what makes the Tor browser possible. So you can browse the internet anonymously, which we think is a very important thing. But if you flip Tor on its head, you get the dark web, and that means you could also run a service, a website, or whatever online anonymously, and that's obviously controversial, but that's a big win for cypherpunks. And then BitTorrent was a big win, also made by cypherpunks, and that was a probably the first really big success, which is a protocol that allows people to share huge amounts of data online for free. Again, this goes back to asymmetry. We're getting to a point where the only people who could afford to host large amounts of data online were Amazon and Apple and Google and Microsoft. People who could have giant servers and pay for the bandwidth, and so BitTorrent solved that and democratized the ability to share data online. But it got used for pirating movies a lot and stuff. So people have it got controversial, and entire industries hated it. But the instructive thing about it was no one could kill it.
It's over. It's game over at that point.
It's game over because industries hate BitTorrent, couldn't kill it over the course of we're at 15 years or more now. So that's the thing. One of the really key things to understand about the difference between centralized services, and in that case, you'd use Napster as the counterpoint. Centralized service fell to an attack, a legal attack in the case of Napster. Decentralized protocol, BitTorrent couldn't be killed because there's no head to chop off. And it still runs, I don't know how, 25% of the traffic on the internet or something is BitTorrent. It's crazy. Jeez. So I that's not a real number. It was pretty high the last I checked. I don't know what it's at now. But the point is, cryptographic protocols are powerful, important. And so then, where this is going, obviously, is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was the first time we managed to succeed at making a cryptocurrency, which, again, we'd been trying for 15 or 20 years at that point. By 2008, we've been trying to make cryptocurrencies, but they all had problems. And one of the single biggest problems was nobody'd figured out how to create a cryptocurrency with a decentralized mint.
Okay.
And the decentralized mint is the most important thing because that's what makes it impossible for anybody to cheat, right? So in every currency in human history before Bitcoin, there was somebody controlling the mint. And that somebody, without fail, ended up cheating, right? In every currency in human history, somebody's controlling the mint and they find some excuse to issue more currency to them and their frat buddies, and devalue it for everyone else. So, there are lots of important things that are possible in cryptocurrencies and lots of different attributes, and you could design one to support, whatever you cared about. But one of the fundamental things that had to be solved was, how do you create the currency in a way that doesn't allow anybody to cheat by fucking with the value of the currency by issuing more? So Bitcoin solved that. But the Bitcoin was probably maybe the 100th cryptocurrency I had tested in my life.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I beta tested Bitcoin in 2007 or 8. And at that point, I didn't know it was going to turn out to be what it did. We just thought, we're trying another stupid cryptocurrency protocol, So somewhere on floppy disks, I'm a billionaire.
So somewhere along the line, cryptocurrency existed, but then was it Silk Road that really took it mainstream?
I don't know. I think I don't even know. Like I said, I think by 2008, I was done with it.
Okay.
And so,
because that didn't happen until 5 years later.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, Bitcoin didn't really register until maybe 2012 or 13 or something. By then I wasn't really paying attention. I like to work on things 5 or 10 years before the hype cycle. But once it's going mainstream, it doesn't really need my help anymore. And so I think that, Silk Road probably got Bitcoin some press. But I think the real lesson is that the advancement that Bitcoin brought of being able to create a decentralized mint, to create a deflationary currency for the first time ever, it became kind of inevitable, right? I think in some sense Bitcoin is inevitable. Once that breakthrough had been made, I mean, it could be ignored, and it could have taken a lot of fits and starts, and maybe you could characterize the first 5 years or so that way. But humanity is not going back. When humans invent a new technology and prove that it works, we adopt it eventually in time. So it's not like, I used the example before, like it's not like humans probably invented the wheel and then decided not to use it. That maybe for a generation or two, it was controversial, and some humans thought that the wheelie people were assholes and should all be lynched or whatever. That's probably the normal adoption cycle. So we killed all the people using wheels, but eventually realized, oh, you know what, this wheel thing is actually pretty awesome, and so now we do wheels. And that's really how I think about the adoption cycle for a lot of technologies. Is at first it's controversial, and everyone's got all these imaginary failure modes that they get terrified of, and they want to regulate it into oblivion. And you can see sometimes we're successful at that for a generation or two. A good example of that in our lifetime is nuclear reactors have been regulated out of being developed in the U.S., but there's no question we should actually be building them. And I think that a lot of technologies are like that. So Bitcoin, or the decentralized mint aspect of Bitcoin in particular, right now, it's or at least for a while, it was like really controversial, and now it's like controversial but unkillable. And people think that maybe governments are going to try to regulate Bitcoin, and in the short run they can try a bunch of poorly behaved bullshit. But the truth is, if you look on longer time horizons, a century from now, Bitcoin will regulate governments.
Bitcoin will regulate governments, not the other way around.
That's right. The consensus mechanism that makes the decentralized mint possible is fundamentally democratic. It's fundamentally empowering. It is a better way of doing fair decision making. The blockchain gives you transparency. It gives you auditability. It gives you a much better way of governing a process than the other bullshit humans have been doing before Bitcoin, right? And so what's exciting now that a lot of people probably aren't paying attention to is how people are building on that. So Bitcoin is by design very limited in what it can do, but when you look at how people have advanced on that, with Ethereum and these other things, and now when you look at how things are extending with DeFi and smart contracts, they're using the blockchain to create these governance mechanisms where you could have very complex interactions, and you can define who's allowed to do what when, and who's allowed to change what under what circumstances, and that's very important. It's just like contract law. That's why we call them smart contracts. It's like contract law. You can define the contract to allow for interactions that are relevant. So even the things that people bitch and moan about with cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency could be used by terrorists or pedophiles or whatever, right? So you could define a cryptocurrency that embodies your values. Like, okay, you want to be able to unroll transactions when they're used to fund terrorist groups, but you don't want to unroll them when they don't need to be de-anonymized or exposed or rolled back when there's no problem, or when people are using it for legitimate things. You could define all that in a smart contract, and this toolkit gives you the ability to do that. The old-fashioned way of doing it was kind of this giant morass of humans, some more well behaved than others, sort of enforcing and auditing and adjudicating every possible failure mode. So I'm very excited about the future of humans being able to create protocols that are used more and more for the things that society needs to do, and get it out of the hands of these complicated and legal structures and things with screwy incentives. So
I agree. I'm looking forward to that as well. You always see the spikes with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, particularly. When do you see that leveling out?
It is leveling out over time, right? And that's the way to think about it, is that, if the volatility of cryptocurrency bugs you, well, everything else is more volatile than Bitcoin now. And Bitcoin, will become less volatile over time. And, that could take, it could happen faster or slower. In some sense, we're already at a point with Bitcoin where it can only be so volatile within a window.
Yeah.
And
you start to see it more.
Yeah. Yeah. Bitcoin's last drop was only 50% or whatever in the last couple months.
Yeah.
That's not so bad. 50% drop. That's not nearly as bad as it used to be when it was 50,000%. So we're trending towards stable.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I have like a Bitcoin ATM down the street from me.
Oh yeah. Those are probably scams. I would stay away from that.
Oh, I have.
Yeah.
So I want to stay in this lane of development and invention, but I want to switch over real quick to 3D printing.
Oh yeah.
Because as you can see, I'm an avid 3D printer enthusiast as well.
Cool.
And you worked as an advisor to Makerbot, which is a 3D printer manufacturer. Tell me about that. How you got involved with that?
Well, I was friends with Bree Pettis from years before Makerbot existed, and so Bree used to be. I was living in Seattle at the time. Bree was when I met him, he was a middle school art teacher, and Bree was really excited about like helping kids and people in general just learn how to do stuff, how to build stuff, how to make stuff in a very DIY fashion. And so he started this. It's like even before YouTube, I think he started this video blog. And nobody had done that before. It was like one of the only ones on the internet. I think it was called I Make Things. And the video blog was Bree doing like DIY projects in his apartment. I think he like turned a VCR into a cat feeder or something, and things like that. And my buddy Eric Johansson and we had this lab called the Hackerbot lab in Seattle, which was kind of what you would now call a hacker space at the time. This is like the early 2000s or something. And so we had built this robot called the Hackerbot, and then we invited other nerds to come, build cool shit. A lot of nerds we know, they're software nerds. They had never built anything that moved before. And so we had this shop just full of tools and things. And so nerds would come by and do weird projects and on nights and weekends. And anyway, Bree used to come by and film some of those projects for his blog. And he ended up making his first robots with us. And so anyway, we became friends with Bree back in those days. And then he eventually he got famous from the blog and moved to New York and started a hackerspace there called NYC Resistor. And then, nerds started hanging out there doing weird projects. And one of the projects they did was a weekend project to build a 3D printer. And they built the first Makerbot at NYC Resistor. None of them had ever seen an actual 3D printer before. So I had a lab in Seattle, the Intellectual Ventures lab where I was working. And I invited Bree to come hang out there, and he could see our 3D printers because we had commercial ones.
And what did the commercial ones look like at that time? Weren't they just massive in size?
Yeah, they were big. They worked very much like a Makerbot. They were, $100,000 or $200,000 like industrial tools for prototyping. And, compared to a Makerbot or anything you've used, they were heavily over-engineered. the print head was like the size of your head.
Yeah.
And it, had a lot of thermal control for the entire bay, had a lot of precision machined custom parts to build these things. They were expensive to build and maintain and operate. The filament was all precision filament that came in a sealed cartridge with a, RFID in it, so you couldn't use shit filament in your machine. It was a lot of very tightly controlled stuff, and it was just early days for 3D printing. And it was low volume, high value kind of stuff, and so it was expensive. No one could probably afford to do it except labs like ours. So it was pretty rare. So anyway, Bree ended up, and his partners at the time ended up starting a company to make Makerbots as kits. So they basically they produced a kit out of like plywood and screws that you could buy, and you could order the kit from them. And it had like 700 screws. So to assemble a Makerbot took you like a month worth of nights and weekends of putting all these screws in to make it work.
Yep.
And they made a few versions of the kit, and then they started a little assembly line to build the kits themselves. And so you could buy an assembled Makerbot. That's kind of how it started. And so I became an advisor for them early on, mostly just to Bree, helping him think through stuff around the business. I don't know how instrumental I really was. He was highly motivated. Bree was really good at getting people excited about 3D printing. And, they tried to do it as kind of a very community-oriented DIY homemaker kind of thing.
Very consumer friendly.
A lot of open source. Well, I don't know if it was consumer friendly at first so much as like nerd friendly.
Right. Okay.
At first, it was really for people who wanted to build a 3D printer. And what Bree tried to do is turn it into a company and a product for people who wanted to build things with a 3D printer. And so there was that was a very difficult early transition of getting it to the point where it could be a consumer product. Now, and so with Replicator 2, I think that was kind of the first one that was like, buy the thing, you could, in a couple hours, you could sort of set it up, figure out how to use it, and start making stuff. And you didn't have to finick with it constantly. And these days, the finicking is still part of 3D printing, but it's a lot more, there's a lot more support, and a lot of the problems are solved. So I think it's come a long way.
Yeah, agreed.
The motivation for me and what I was so excited about is, I'm a real junkie for tools. Like, I love tools. I love understanding them. I love knowing how things are made so that I can be inventing on the borders of what's possible. And if you know what the tools can do, then you can imagine what they can build. And what I love the most are programmable tools. So a lot of the tools that we've had historically are very special purpose. They're specialized. They can do one thing. In manufacturing, a lot of the tools, if you want to make a Happy Meal toy, well, you have to make a mold and then stick it in an injection molding machine and then inject plastic in there to make those things. And that tool can only make one thing, that one Happy Meal toy. And so it's not special. It's not programmable. It's not adaptable. And a cool thing about a 3D printer or a laser cutter or a water jet, these are tools that are programmable, and they don't care if they ever make the same thing twice. So they're so useful for prototyping. That's what I loved about bringing 3D printing to the consumer space. And that's what Makerbot did. And I'm very proud of Bree and the team there for pioneering, bringing that tool. My daughter grew up in a school with Makerbots. To her and to you, like, that's a normal way of making something. If you want to make something, you think about drawing it in SketchUp or some CAD program and printing it. That's just normal, which for me growing up, I didn't have that. I spent most of my early life trying to get access to tools.
You're writing G code from scratch, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so I had to learn the hard way. And so anyway, I think it's an exciting thing that 3D printing kind of broke through, and it became kind of a mainstream thing. And Makerbot had a lot to do with that. The company ended up selling to another 3D printing company. And so I don't know how it's going now, but you're using something that's not a Makerbot, right?
No. So I currently have a FL Sun QQS Pro.
Okay.
I need to upgrade soon. I haven't printed anything recently, but this is probably my third or fourth printer.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, I've modded STLs. They have Thingiverse out there now that many people download models from, and you can prototype on your own. I've printed, the barcode logo on bottle openers and things like that. But I think that prototyping, it puts that capability in the hands of anyone without that overhead cost. Yeah, no, it's super exciting. Even if you don't have a 3D printer, you got a buddy who has one, and so there's just so much you can do. It's really cool. It's come that far. And you mentioned the Intellectual Ventures Lab. So you've worked there on a myriad of different projects. Yeah. Brain surgery tool, a machine to suppress hurricanes, 3D food printers. And the one I need to ask you about, which which one I'm referring to, is the laser that can shoot down mosquitoes. You got to tell me about that one. Well, that's probably our most famous invention. People love it because there's just nobody who likes mosquitoes. And so, and really almost even pacifists have a death wish for mosquitoes often. So it's a surprising for like a literal death ray. It's oddly popular. But yeah, that machine we invented as a way of trying to eradicate malaria, or at least protect people from malaria. And this is kind of a sad, it's actually kind of an example of one of the problems with Americans. They don't have a malaria to worry about, and so they don't worry about it. But this is a disease that takes almost 1 million lives a year, and half of them are kids under 5 years old. And so, it's a real big problem that humans need to solve. And so anyway, we were lucky to be able to invent technologies to help eradicate malaria in the developing world in our lab. And that's because we were inventing with Bill Gates, and he was supporting those projects. And so one of the cool ones was this machine that could just find anything moving, aim a laser at it to sample the wing beat frequency. And from that, you can figure out if it's a bug, and if it's a bug, what kind of bug. And if it's a mosquito, what kind of mosquito. You can figure out what species it is, and even the gender. And so if it's a female Anopheles stephensi, then we can shoot it down with a lethal laser, and it can probably kill 20, 30 mosquitoes a second. That's insane. So the idea is, you would set it up as a perimeter security around a building or a clinic or a village or a hospital or whatever. Damn, I need one for my backyard. Everyone wants it for their backyard. Yeah, I think the project would have been more successful if we had just made the backyard bug zapper and sold it to Americans. I think it's sort of the life cycle of technologies is usually that you got to sell it for a lot of money to Americans first, get the economies of scale up, and then you can afford to go take it to the developing world later. But we tried to skip that, and I think it's hurt the project. And the driver really puts it in perspective, right? Where, we in the US aren't necessarily affected directly, although still we're aiming to rectify a problem for, many, millions of people throughout the world. I think and it's a good example. It was a problem that affected us. So we had malaria in the US, but we eradicated it largely by spraying chemicals that kill everything. So DDT in particular. And then, most of the good stuff comes back, but hopefully without the malaria. So DDT was a pesticide that worked, and we used it at a large scale in the US. We got rid of malaria here, and then we just stopped working on it. And I think that's a good thing for people to keep in mind. That was a technology, the best technology we had at the time. This is in like the 30s, 40s, 50s in the Southwest in the US. It was the best technology. Worked for us, wasn't good enough to solve the problem in the rest of the world. There's much bigger landmass in Southeast Asia and Europe with malaria that needs to be covered. It's a much bigger problem. The climate is much more conducive to growing mosquitoes and spreading it. So it's just, we need to invent new tools for the arsenal, and we need to go solve those problems. And, I think in the US, we've gotten kind of despite all the globalization stuff, we haven't done a good job of trying to solve problems at a global scale.
And I think that's really important to course correct on.
I'm about to fire my mosquito guy. He's got the spray and pray technique.
Yeah.
Needs more prayer.
Yeah, that's not good enough. Yeah, right. See, he's still trying the old school tech. So yeah, look, at this point, and we started that project in like 2007. There's a Make magazine issue that talks about how to make one. I think with an Arduino these days, you could probably make your own laser bug zapper on your 3D printer, and I think people should get on it. It's not that hard to do motion detection algorithms anymore and steer a laser.
Just go for it, man.
Yeah.
Just go for it. I want to talk about hacking for a moment.
Yeah.
And it's parallel to invention. And the public is, as you know, is quick to use hacker and cyber criminal synonymously, although I'm trying to reverse that mindset of people. But correct me if I'm wrong, but you once said that hackers should be rescued from the security department and redirected to product development, which I thought was a very, very interesting perspective. Would you mind expanding on what you meant by that?
Sure. Yeah, I think look, I've been a computer hacker my whole life. And so that was, at first, no one knew what it meant. And then when they did, they were pretty sure it meant criminal. I like to at least pretend like I'm not a criminal. It's not what I'm trying to do. It's not what I care about for hackers. And the truth is, most hackers in the US are not criminals. The economic opportunity for somebody who can configure a firewall is better than the economic opportunity of stealing credit card numbers and competing with, Romanian hackers who have that covered. So I just think that there's a lot of the criminal hacking activity is not coming from the US. And the truth is, in my mind, hackers more narrowly defined. My friends are the people who, they have insanely curious minds. Like they're trying to solve puzzles, and computer security problems are just like a bottomless pit of puzzles to solve for them, right? They're not trying to steal anything. All they're trying to do is, brag to their friends that they cracked a puzzle before anyone else. That's what I used to be doing, and that's what we were always doing, is trying to impress other hackers. And so I think there's just what I love about hackers and the sort of hacker community at large is that it attracts a certain type of curious intellect. And those people are really good at figuring things out that the rest of the world's never going to figure out. They're good at figuring out what's technically possible. And that turns out to be where all your new inventions come from. It's where all your new technologies come from. And you really can't skip that step. Somebody has to do the thing that was not printed in the directions, right? And that's so important for humans. It's how we evolve as a species. It's how we advance as a civilization. And we should really be celebrating these people who are good at discovery. And, that overlaps with scientists a bit. It overlaps with invention a bit. These are not, rigorous terms, but yeah, that's what I love about hackers. And, for a long time, I think I saw our best hackers end up at, these big companies trying to configure an IDS or something. And that's okay. That's good. And it's important. Somebody should do it. And probably all of us should do it for a while, but then start thinking about where else can you go with that skill set. And it's sort of less an admonishment of hackers and more for everyone else in the world. Most companies don't realize that they have these, real geniuses in the company who they can't figure out how to relate to, they can't figure out how to communicate with, and they can't figure out how to put them to work on something more important. And so I think in my mind, that's I'm trying to figure out how do we invent new technologies and bring them into the world at a larger scale. And I need those folks as allies, and I need everybody else to see them as allies, in our corporations, I need people to understand that, the hackers in the IT department are actually the ones who are going to come up with the next generation of technology that you should be bringing into the world. And right now there's a massive disconnect there. That's just not a normal thing. Nobody else besides me says that. Nobody's even trying. That's not what's going on. And so we just have a lot of these gaps to solve. And so that's how I think about it.
I agree 100%. I think that we pigeonhole that term.
Yeah.
And even coming into the industry, quote unquote hackers could potentially feel pigeonholed, within their own job function as well. So, yes, I do believe that by allowing that exploration, exploring those other options, that's how we continue to grow. That's how we continue to innovate.
It has come a long way. I mean, I'm probably one of the first hackers to publicly say I'm a hacker, because in those days, it was synonymous with criminal. Even other hackers would say they were, a computer security professional or something, or developer or coder or something. They wouldn't say they were a hacker. So I started that very early and took a lot of that heat. But now, Facebook and Google have billboards saying they want to hire hackers. So we've come a long way. And I think that's really good. I think it's not like, look, the hackers historically have been kind of poorly socialized. And I think a lot of times hackers took that on as a badge of honor and we optimized for being snarky and that kind of thing. And, haven't made themselves the most accessible to other folks. And so there's a little responsibility there too. But I think, you got over time, and the older you get, the more mature you get, even for hackers, some of them eventually learn to appreciate other people and their skills. Even the people in the marketing droid department are important, so you kind of got to learn to get along with everybody. And I think that's, we've seen some of that, and it's been very helpful. So I'm optimistic that over time, Revenge of the Nerds will win.
Yes, I'm pulling for the nerds.
Yeah, me too.
So Pablos, you've been ahead of the curve essentially since you were a kid.
Yeah.
You build tech for the future. I have to ask you this, and since I'm a Back to the Future fan, I'm gonna phrase it like this.
Okay.
You and I get in a DeLorean. We fast forward 30 years. What does technology look like?
Well, I think 30 years is a good window. That one's a little bit hard. It's interesting because 30 years is kind of 2 or 3 generations deep as far as funding and tech cycles go, right? And so it's hard to predict out there. And the way I think about it is, I think I can tell you what technologies are coming. It's hard for me to put them on the calendar, right? Because again, humans can kind of fuck it up in the short run, but it's in some sense 100 years is easier, because all the technologies that we're developing now that are working, that are good, and in 100 years they can be ubiquitous, right? In the short run, humans can kind of fuck it up.
Yeah.
So I think the 30-year window is more of a question of are we going to aggressively adopt the technologies that can make a difference, or are we going to keep bitching and moaning and squandering our lives on season 2 of Netflix or whatever? So it's just that's kind of the game you're playing. But anyway, I think, chief among all technologies, that are important are the ones that can solve energy, right? Humans are made of energy. Everything we do is fundamentally maps to energy. Americans right now, we get 9 times as much energy as the average human. There are 3 billion people who live on less energy than your refrigerator uses. And it's just, that if you want to talk about the problems in the world, inequality, everything, it just maps to energy. We have to solve that. We've got to get the world from 5 terawatts to 50. And that's how you make the world peaceful. That's how you make the world fair. That's how you make the world, much better. So the technologies that can solve energy, we have some awesome ones. Nuclear reactors, if we had not outlawed them in the 80s, you probably never would have heard of global warming, right? This is something we could have prevented if we had taken this miraculous energy source, continued to improve on it, build modern safe reactors. I'm saying that because we invented a modern safe reactor at our lab 15 years ago. We're still not allowed to build it because of the US regulations on nuclear reactors. So I think that's fucked up. I hope that on the time horizon you're talking about, we solve that. I'm optimistic that we will. A lot of the things that made nuclear unpopular, those ideas are dying with the generation that outlawed them soon. And, my kids growing up in a world where they're just they're going to just wonder, like, why the hell aren't we doing this? It's carbon free. It scales. It makes sense. It works in the dark and during a snowstorm. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
It is fucked up because you're looking at regulation, right?
That's right. It's just humans. It's not a technology problem. It's a human decision-making problem. So yeah, that's one. I think I'm interested in space-based solar arrays, which is a lot less in people's consciousness, but solar panels, if you put them in space, they get sun 24/7 all year long. They get 8 times as much energy, and they can beam it down to Earth anywhere on the planet. So I think that is a technology that is now is the time to develop and deploy it. I'm very excited about that one. I'm sort of less excited about recycling and carbon capture and these things because I think they are the economics don't make sense and they don't scale so well. And it's important to develop them and do the best we can. But if you want to really solve these problems, it's going to come down to making a lot of cheap, clean energy.
And as this technology evolves, cybersecurity is evolving as well.
Yeah.
So I assume that, our industry is going to continue to grow as well.
Well, no kidding. I mean, with cybersecurity, I remember back in, up until 2001, you couldn't give away a pen test.
No. We
would literally go I have friends, all my friends working in security. I was too at that time, actually. Like I would, we would try to go jump up and down, wave our arms. We would literally hack into companies in a mercenary fashion. We would go show them, look, we stole all your shit. Want to hire us to prevent somebody else from doing that? That's how, and then you still couldn't make the sale. So and then in 2001, after 9/11, everybody got security as a line item on their budget. And so now companies, as they're sort of less about actually making things secure and more about just being able to prove that they spent some money and pass the buck.
A check mark.
Yeah, a check mark. So I think that's frustrating, but there is obviously a market. The market's full of, snake oil salesmen and a lot of bullshit, but there's some legitimate things out there and some talented people, and it's highly evolved and it's a war of escalation. So it's not getting any less relevant, and we've evolved from the opportunistic fraud and sort of consumer crap to now very highly evolved, nation state hacking stuff that it's getting very important. So
yeah.
Yeah. So I think
I couldn't predict what's going to happen next year. It's so rapid.
More of the same and worse.
And probably cheaper for the attacker.
Yeah, probably cheaper. There you go. The using AIs on the offense is getting pretty interesting. I would go look at like Codex, look at the AIs that have soaked up GitHub. Like being able to automate the ability to find and write exploits off of that stuff. There's a lot of exciting frontiers there.
And that's a whole nother conversation is getting into AI. But all right, last question and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Time travel. Will that ever exist?
Oh,
is that a technology that we're going to see in our lifetime?
Now you're out of my jurisdiction. No, I haven't seen anything that makes me think we can do it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're making science fiction real, so I had to ask.
So I think there's an important distinction. You know, there's things that require breakthroughs, which don't really happen on a schedule. You know, we do get more and more breakthroughs because our toolkit's better, but some of these things, you know, may happen tomorrow and they may happen in a century. They may never happen. And it's really difficult to guess when the breakthroughs are coming. I'm
still holding out.
Yeah. Time travel, you know, it's probably likely to happen for some very narrow kinds of like information first, but moving you and me around in a DeLorean is unlikely.
I can see that.
Yeah,
because you have AI predictive algorithms and forecasting. So as that improves, as time goes on, you're going to be able to predict better, which may be able to in turn predict future happenings. Yeah,
or through some nasty trick of physics, be able to see what variables are coming before they arrive.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's not.
It's not going to happen in my lifetime because I always promise myself I'm coming back to tell myself.
Oh.
And I haven't told myself yet.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. Leave YouTube videos for your descendants.
Yes. So Pablos, you've ventured the world, articulating your visions to others about the future of technology. And in all of your travels, since this is Barcode, I have to ask you this question.
Sure.
Where is the coolest bar you have ever been to?
Coolest bar I was ever in was in Tel Aviv.
Okay. Do you remember the name of it?
It had a Russian name. I forgot the name of the bar. That place, Tel Aviv, is awesome. There's probably a lot of cool bars there.
Awesome. Never been there, but it's on my list now.
Yeah, it should be. That's the most exciting place for anyone into tech.
Cool. So I just heard last call here. Do you have time for one more?
Oh, yeah.
If you opened a cybersecurity themed bar, what would the name be? And what would your signature drink be called?
The bar would be called Caesar's Challenge. We used to have a party at DEF CON called Caesar's Challenge. And a hacker named Caesar hosted the party. He had to be pretty elite to get into this party. But if you got in, Caesar would issue a challenge to everybody at the party and provide unlimited free booze. And the challenge would be like, a question like, what's the minimum number of bits required to do remote exploit on an AS400? Something like that.
Okay.
And you'd have all these hackers getting drunk, hanging out, trying to like solve this challenge all night long. And what was so important about this is it gave, sort of poorly socialized hackers something to talk to each other about. That was a very important insight that Caesar had, is that nerds don't know how to socialize. So you got to get them drunk and you got to give them something to talk about. And if you give them something technical that none of them really know a lot about, they can all sort of argue all night, and it's awesome. So Caesar's Challenge was the best party for hackers that ever existed. This is ancient history now. I don't know that. I mean, most of us probably don't even make it to DEF CON anymore. Although I was there last. But yeah, it's that would be the ultimate cybersecurity bar, Caesar's Challenge.
That is fucking awesome, man. I love it. And so would your drink be like?
The drink would be called. Oh man. That's a good one. What would the drink be called? I think it would be called Whopper.
Whopper.
Whopper is the name of the giant computer in War Games, which was the only good hacker movie ever made.
I love it, man. Hey, Pablos, thanks again, man. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights and your visions with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks. Good luck, and really great to hang out with you guys.
Thanks, man. Take care.
All right, bye.
As you know, Barcode is where security and IT professionals hang out after a long day. So, get your message front and center to our fans by sponsoring an episode. Learn more at thebarcodepodcast.com/sponsor. Cheers.
Unfortunately, it's time to shut the bar down for this episode. Thanks for stopping in. See you next time. We'll save you a seat. Be sure to check us out at thebarcodepodcast.com.